Hello everybody, this is Tip-Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over a custom set of legendary cards created by the users of r/custom magic on Reddit. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down each of these cards, kind of tell you what I think of them, how they could be more balanced, how they could fit within the rules better, and kind of just give you my thoughts on them, similar to spoiler season. You know, we just had Commander Legends spoiler season, and I thought a great way to celebrate would be to look at what the community has developed as some awesome Commander designs. So yes, we are going to jump right into this. So starting off, we have Navigator of Unreality. Now before I talk about him, there's two things I want to say. First, you can see what Reddit user designed the card in the upper left. That is, I'm not in any way taking credit for making these cards. And then also if you want to see, more cards, there's a link in the description to the Reddit where I found these. So let's get into this. Navigator of Unreality is a white, a blue, a black, and a red for a legendary creature incarnation. It's a 5/5, so it's a 5/5 for 4, but the colors are pretty restrictive, so depending on the ability, it would be okay. And then it's to swap all instances of the following words on other cards, emblems, and tokens. End step and upkeep, enters the battlefield and dies, draws, and discards. So if you have a spell that says draw 2 cards, instead it's going to say discard 2 cards. If you have something that triggers at your end step, it triggers at your upkeep. Now, in terms of this card, I think it's a very cool effect because, sometimes we get commanders and they're kind of they're not boring, but they're something we've seen before, Oh, I think there was one in Commander Legends where it's like, every time you sacrifice a permanent, put a counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to the counters on it to its target. Any target. And it's like, well, yeah, we've had that effect like on a creature before. It's not that exciting. It's not something that new to build around. Sure, if you pull it, it's kind of cool, but it's not something brand new, and this is. But I think from a rules perspective, it is a little bit iffy. I think if we were to word it instead of instead of doing all three, it does one of these. So if it said, if an ability an opponent controls would trigger during their end step, it instead triggers during their upkeep. And if an ability an opponent controls would trigger during their upkeep, it triggers at their end step. And you'd have to probably make it so it doesn't go like infinite there, where it like doesn't trigger ever or whatever. But I think that would be a better way to word it. Of course, I'm not a rules expert, and I don't know if there's been any other cards framed like this. If there is, let me know in the comments down below if you guys know the rulings on this one. But I think the concept is really well done because it isn't something that is inherently broken or overpowered. It's something that's like, they're giving you this card and they're saying, find something to do with it, not giving you this card and saying, this card works well. And I think that is great design. Next, we have Zaglax, Hazardous Hatchling. It's a 2-cost green legendary creature, Hydra 1/1. And it says spells you cast with mana costs that contain X cost WUBRG less to cast, but this effect only reduces the amount of colored mana you pay. So generally what this is going to do is it's going to turn most like X green Hydras, that X enter with X +1/+1 counters, and a green Hydra into just X. And that's pretty powerful. But then it says whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, put a +1/+1 counter on Zaglax for each color of mana spent to cast that spell. So it's going to kind of encourage you to go 5 color. You want to pay, if you're paying 5 for X, if you can pay WUBRG, Zaglax gets 5 bigger, so it's kind of a Voltron-y commander, but you're also like ramping out a lot of other things. I think it's really interesting. Also just note that it also doesn't say creature spells with mana costs that contain X. It's also like normal spells. So if you have something that costs WUBRG and X, it only costs X, and I'm sure there are some pretty crazy things you can do with it. So I don't think this is inherently broken, but I think that it is a very powerful effect. And it is interesting to see a WUBRG kind of X matters deck, which we really don't have a great commander for at the moment. Then again, we have things like Kenrith, who just kind of works well as any 5-color commander. So next we have Hilo, Titan of Time's Apathy. So this is a kind of take on the Theros Titans, Theros Beyond Death Titans in Orzhov. So it's a blue and a white for a legendary creature, Elder Giant, 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. So very typical for the, Titans. And then whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile target non-land permanent until Hilo leaves the battlefield. And I think this is a much better design than either of the other two Titans. Why? Because here's what it does. It enters the battlefield, it exiles something, and then it gets sacrificed. So when it ETBs, it's just flickering something. But when it gets entered for real, then it's when it does its full power effect. Unlike Uro, who will always do the same effect, just when it enters the battlefield, you also get a 6/6 and also can attack with it. This turns into a I'm going to flicker for 2 and get a full exile for 4, which is a lot more fair. And then, yes, whenever he attacks, he does get to exile, and that's a pretty fair ability. But the second they find a removal spell for Hilo, you know, all their creatures come back, and so it feels less bad to, like, use a removal spell on it that isn't exiling it, for instance. Because, like, using, like, a kill spell on Uro kind of feels bad sometimes, because you're like, oh, well, they can just recast it, and I just gave them an ETB trigger, and so I think that this card is actually designed really, really, really well. I mean, I'm still not a big fan of the, you know, Titan cycle in terms of their power level, but I think this one is designed the best out of the ones we've seen. And obviously it's not a real card, but I think that it works really well. Next, we have Marine the Curator. So this is a mono white commander. It's a 4-cost white legendary creature human advisor 2/4, and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, put a page counter on target artifact or enchantment you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a permanent with 2 or more page counters on it, scry 2, and then you can remove 2 page counters from a permanent you control to draw a card along with paying 2 mana there. So white not having card draw has kind of been a big thing in the community for a little bit now, and you know, in this subreddit, there are a lot of attempts to give white something that feels white in flavor, but also, you know, is card draw. And I think this one works really well. It's definitely going in an artifact or enchantment deck, and then it does this interesting thing of it passively lets you scry 2 if you don't want to be spending mana, which isn't exactly card draw, but it is card advantage. And then it lets you then turn that somewhat card advantage into actual card draw once you get like enough counters out, and then your opponent can still interact with it very easily. Just kill the artifact that you've been putting all these counters on, because you do need to have 2 on a specific one card, and now you've put your eggs in one basket, and like it's encouraging, like it helps you draw more cards than your opponent. Now what I would have liked to see better is maybe buff the bottom ability a little bit more, maybe not even make it cost mana, but make it whenever an opponent draws a card besides their first one each turn or something. Obviously that would kind of nerf it, but also buff it. I don't know. I think that it would be fine to be printed like this, but you are going to get 3, you know, page counters every cycle of the table if you're playing a 4-player game, so that is something to keep in mind. Next, we have Aguilath the Challenger. It's a 5-cost red legendary creature giant warrior, and it says cowards can't block warriors, so very, you know, we've seen this text on now, I believe, 2 other creatures. And I keep talking about these like they're real cards, but it's an homage or like a reference to Kargan Intimidator and some other Intimidator, but whatever. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target opponent chooses a creature they control. Aguilath fights that creature. Whenever a creature a player controls dies, other creatures they control become cowards until end of turn. So your opponent kind of has to choose a creature, and they're gonna fight. And so if they have a bigger creature than Aguilath, you know, they can kind of just have them fight, but you get to choose what opponent does this. So in a 1v1, this is pretty bad. And then the advantage is if they have, like, no creatures and they have to sack a creature, then all of their creatures become unblockable are unable to block warriors. So it's this very interesting dynamic of now your kill spells kind of turn everything into, like, not block spells. So that it's this interesting little perspective change, or I don't know, it kind of turns your kill spells into other types of spells, and I really like that. Next, we have Kaldor, Insurance Dealer. It's white and white for legendary creature Cat Advisor 2/2 with Vigilance, and it says, whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, create 2 treasure tokens. So this is a very powerful effect. I think it's a little bit too powerful. Obviously, having, you know, I don't know. It's very rampy. Again, this is kind of trying to fix white's problem of letting it ramp. And of course, you are losing something. So you're losing something to gain 2 treasure tokens. But are you? Because it's not actually requiring you to lose something. And I'm very torn about this card on whether it's too powerful or not. If you hit ATB, then they target it. It kind of gets its... Though I think that's my big issue with this, actually, is that you play this, and then if they kill it with a kill spell, it creates the treasure tokens to pay for the commander tax if you wanted. And obviously that isn't a super huge deal, but things like Golos, who kind of helps pay his own commander tax, you know, have shown to be somewhat problematic. I think because it's mono white, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but I think it is a very, very powerful card. Maybe better in a deck than, you know, leading it. Next, we have Adia, 10th District Detective. It's a 3-cost white and blue legendary creature, human wizard soldier. It's a 2/3, and it says, whenever a creature you control dies, investigate, which means you create a clue token, which lets you pay mana and sack it to draw cards. And then whenever you sacrifice a clue, you may pay 3. If you do, create a white aura enchantment token named Arrest attached to a creature an opponent controls. The token has enchanted creature, and enchanted creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So this is kind of taking the investigate ability, which generally just draws you cards, and turning it into like investigating and actually doing the arrest. I think this is a little bit harsh. I mean, yes, you have to pay 2 mana to investigate and actually like draw the card, and then you have to pay the 3 mana to arrest them, but you don't actually have to pay the investigate cost. If you can find some other way to sack it, I don't think it's overpowered because you are putting like 5 mana into it in general, and they can take this out, but I think it would have been more fair if when Adia left, the enchantments were either destroyed or they didn't work while she wasn't left. Like, what if the arrest token said as long as your opponent's, as long as your opponent's control, or as long as you control your commander, then it has these abilities. Then it becomes a lot more fair. They can get rid of Adia, and then they can swing, and it's not like they're destroying the enchantments. If you get to replay her, everything can't attack or block again. So I either think she needs to go up a little bit in cost, or that it needs to have a clause of like Adia has to be on the battlefield, because white and blue is good at protecting themselves. So you have this little game now of I need to protect Adia to keep these things out. And if you did that, you may even be able to bring down the cost of, you may pay 1 in a white. And maybe you get rid of the and its abilities can't be activated. Maybe you just do can't attack or block, and then you have this kind of interesting card where you're controlling combat in an interesting way. Next, we have Leandra, Champion of Sparks. It's white for legendary creature, human knight with flying. And it says planeswalkers you control have exalted, which says, whenever the creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with exalted. I assume this would come with a change to exalted where planeswalkers can have it. So now if you have any other creatures with exalted, they get to be boosted based on the number of planeswalkers you control. But then the more interesting ability is as long as this is in your graveyard and you control a planeswalkers you control have -1, return a card named Leandra, Champion of Sparks from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it kind of gets around commander tax by letting you kind of just keep returning it by -1 loyaltying it. And then obviously I think this card would be better if it had exalted, and then boom, she gets bigger the more planeswalkers you have, and then they can be, she's the champion of planeswalkers, so then she can come back. I think that would have made a little bit more sense, and maybe that's meant to be here, but I think that this is interesting, giving, abilities to planeswalkers, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that in the future. Next, we have the Great Pumpkin. It's Wooburg for a legendary creature, plant horror, 5/5, and it says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a black aura enchantment token named Costume attached to target human you control. The token has enchanted creature, and enchanted creature has menace. Then that creature becomes a copy of target non-human creature until end of turn. So at combat, you kind of turn one of your creatures into another creature and then give it menace. And so you can kind of shift around what your creatures are. And I think it's an interesting card. You're definitely putting things in costumes. And of course, you can't just like cheat things out. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. You have to run like non-humans, and you need to run humans and non-humans, and you need to make sure you have like no legendaries because you're creating copies. So I think it's a narrow deck, but I think it's one that could be really interesting. Just like creating costumes, turning humans into non-humans temporarily for like 1 night or 1 combat. Next we have Namlin. Not Namlin, we have Genis, the Generous Dealer. It's a 1 red 2/2 legendary creature, Devil Advisor, and it says instants and sorceries your opponent's cast costs 1 less to cast and have. This spell deals 3 damage to target player that doesn't control a creature named Genis, the Generous Dealer. So you're kind of saying like, hey, all your spells cost less, but you're going to start dealing damage to each other, not me. And so because of that, you kind of get people who are mad at each other. And I like these kind of effects where it's like, oh, you're getting you're kind of getting the benefit from me, but that benefit is that you get to deal damage to your opponents, which means that that opponent's going to get mad at you, and then they're going to deal damage back to you, and then you kind of have this war starting out, and you can kind of sit in the back on your throne, just building up an army. And I like cards like that. And that is going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, there's a couple things you can do. First, hit that like button to show that you like this kind of content. Second, check out a playlist I have with all of my custom Magic videos. I've been doing this for a while. We have things from just reviewing custom cards to going over sets I've made to playing fun games where I make custom commanders based off of randomly generated cards. There's all sorts of craziness, so you guys should check that out. You guys should also check out my Magic the Marveling series, which is a series where I take every single movie in the Marvel Marvel Cinematic Universe and turn it into a Magic the Gathering set. It's crazy. You guys should check it out. Subscribe to stay up to date with all things Magic and see more of my custom Magic videos, and I will see you in the next one.